The bounty hunter's hand was already reaching for his gun when Felicity Rose saw her own reflection in the general store window. Her father's wanted poster plastered right beside her startled face. She froze on the boardwalk of Truckee, California, the summer heat of 1878 making the mountain air shimmer like water, and wondered if this moment would finally be the one that broke her apart completely. 3 years of running, 3 years of sleeping with one eye open, 3 years of watching decent men turn their backs the moment they learned whose blood ran through her veins. The bounty hunter's gaze shifted from the poster to her face, recognition dawning slowly, but she was already moving, her worn boots carrying her toward the stable where her mare waited with the patience of an old friend. Her chest heaved as she reached the stable, fingers fumbling with the saddle straps even though she had performed this ritual 100 times before. The leather was hot under her palms, worn smooth from constant use, and she could feel her heart hammering against her ribs like something wild trying to escape. Her father, Marcus Rose, had robbed 17 banks across California and Nevada territories before the law finally caught up with him 2 months ago in Sacramento. They hanged him on a Tuesday morning while she watched from behind a water trough, unable to look away, unable to save him, unable to do anything but commit the image to memory and carry it with her like a stone in her chest. Easy there. The voice came from behind her, deep and steady as bedrock. Your horse knows you are scared. Felicity spun around, her hand instinctively dropping to the knife she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her skirt. A man stood in the stable doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun so that she could not make out his features clearly at first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that suggested he did not need to announce himself to be noticed. As he stepped forward into the dimmer light of the stable, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes that held something she could not quite name, and a jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. He wore a dusty shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his hat hung down his back by its cord. I am fine, she said, her voice sharper than she intended, and my horse is fine. Then why are you saddling her like the devil himself is breathing down your neck? He moved closer, his movements unhurried, and reached out to steady the mare who had started to shift nervously. His hands were gentle despite their size, and the horse calmed immediately under his touch. I am Ethan Norwood. I work here. She wanted to tell him to mind his own business, to leave her alone so she could disappear into the mountains before that bounty hunter, or anyone else decided her connection to Marcus Rose made her guilty by association. But something in his eyes stopped her, something that looked almost like understanding without judgment, and she found herself hesitating. Felicity, she said finally, not offering her last name because it had become a curse. I need to leave town. Running from something or toward something. His question was direct but not unkind. Does it matter? Might. He finished tightening her saddle strap, checking the buckles with practiced efficiency. Truckee is a good town, mostly. Railroad brought in all kinds, but the people here try to judge a person by what they do, not where they come from. She laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even her. You do not know anything about where I come from. No, he admitted, but I know that look in your eyes. Seen it before in my mirror often enough. He stepped back, giving her space but not retreating entirely. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she could not stand anymore. When he came for me, I put him down. Law said it was self-defense, but there are people in 3 counties who think I am a murderer. So I came here, started over. Felicity stared at him, caught off guard by his honesty. People did not usually offer up their darkest truths to strangers in stable yards, especially not when that stranger was a woman who clearly wanted to bolt. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of boots on the boardwalk outside made her tense. "That bounty hunter," Ethan said quietly, his expression darkening. "He is not looking for you. He is looking for a man who killed a sheriff down in Sacramento. But if you run right now, scared and suspicious, he is going to notice you. Men like that, they notice the runners." "You do not understand. Then help me understand." He moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the stable entrance. Not trapping her, she realized, but shielding her from view. "Whatever you are running from, maybe there is another way." The bounty hunter's voice drifted into the stable, asking someone about a roan stallion. Felicity felt her muscles coil, ready to spring, but Ethan's steady presence kept her grounded. She watched as he turned slightly, his body language casual, and called out, "Can I help you, friend?" The bounty hunter appeared in the doorway, his eyes cold and calculating. He was older than Felicity had initially thought, with silver threading through his dark hair and a network of scars across his left cheek. "Looking for information about a horse. Roan stallion, white sock on the left foreleg. Belonged to a man wanted for murder." "Have not seen a horse matching that description," Ethan said easily. "But you are welcome to check the stalls yourself if you like. Most of what we have here belongs to townsfolk or miners passing through." The bounty hunter's gaze swept the stable, passing over Felicity briefly. She forced herself to stand still, to meet his eyes without flinching, to appear like nothing more than a woman tending to her horse. After a long moment he grunted and turned away. "If you see anything, there is a reward." "We'll keep that in mind," Ethan said. They waited in silence until the sound of boots faded completely. Felicity realized she had been holding her breath and let it out slowly, her shoulders sagging. "Thank you," she managed. "You can stay," Ethan said. "In Truckee, I mean. Get a room at the boarding house, fine work. No reason to keep running unless you have committed a crime yourself." "My father," she started, then stopped. The words felt like rocks in her throat. "My father was Marcus Rose." She watched his face carefully, waiting for the recognition, the disgust, the fear. Marcus Rose had been infamous, his robberies bold and violent, his reputation preceding him like a storm cloud. Ethan's expression shifted, understanding flooding his features, but she did not see the judgment she expected. "The one they hanged in Sacramento," he said slowly. "I heard about that. Heard he had a daughter too, but nobody knew what happened to her. I have been running ever since. People think I helped him, or that I know where he hid the money, or that I am just as bad as he was." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "So yes, I am running, and I am going to keep running until I find somewhere that nobody knows that name." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "Did you help him rob those banks?" "No." "Do you know where any stolen money is?" "No, he never told me anything, said it was safer that way." "Then you have not done anything wrong." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, like her father's sins had nothing to do with her. "Stay, at least for a few days. Let me show you that not everyone is going to judge you for your blood." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly that it ached. But 3 years of running had taught her that hope was dangerous, that trusting people led to disappointment and pain. Still, she was tired, bone deep, soul tired in a way that made even breathing feel like work. "Why do you care?" "Because someone gave me a chance once," Ethan said. "Old rancher named Samuel Tucker. Hired me when nobody else would, taught me that what a man does matters more than what his father did. Figure I should pass that along." Felicity looked down at her hands, at the calluses and scars that told their own story of hard living. Her mare nickered softly, nuzzling her shoulder as if to say that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to stop. 1 week, she heard herself say. I will stay 1 week. If it goes bad, I am leaving. Fair enough. Ethan's smile was small but genuine, transforming his weathered face into something almost handsome. Come on. I will walk you to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs it and she does not gossip. They stepped out of the stable into the late afternoon sunlight, and Felicity felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that made her want to retreat back into the shadows. But Ethan walked beside her with easy confidence, nodding to people they passed, his presence somehow making her feel less like a target. Truckee was smaller than she had initially realized, nestled in the mountains with the Truckee River running through its heart. The railroad had brought prosperity and people, transforming what had once been a small logging town into something livelier. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked Felicity up and down when they entered. She needs a room, Ethan said. Quiet one if you have it. I have the one at the back, 2nd floor, Mrs. Chen said. Overlooks the garden. $2 a week includes breakfast and dinner. Felicity pulled out her small pouch of coins, counting them carefully. She had enough for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she was careful. After that, she would need to find work or move on. I will take it, Mrs. Chen accepted the money and handed her a key. Dinner is at 6. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no fighting. You break my rules, you are out. Understood? Ethan carried her saddlebag up the narrow stairs to the room, which was small but clean with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that did indeed overlook a modest garden. It is not much, he said, setting her bag on the bed, but it is safe. Thank you, Felicity said again. The words felt inadequate for what he had done, but she did not know how else to express the strange mix of gratitude and wariness churning inside her. I work at the stable most days, sunrise to sunset. If you need anything, that is where you will find me. He paused at the door. And Felicity. Give Truckee a chance. Give people a chance. You might be surprised. After he left, she sat on the bed and stared at the wall, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Her plan had been to keep moving, to disappear into the vast wilderness of the Sierra Nevada mountains, where nobody would find her. Instead, she was in a boarding house room in a town where at least one person knew exactly who her father had been, and she had agreed to stay. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. Mrs. Chen served stew and fresh bread at a long table in the dining room, and Felicity found herself seated between an elderly prospector who talked nonstop about a silver vein he was convinced existed somewhere up in the hills, and a young woman named Mary who worked at the dress shop. Nobody asked invasive questions. Nobody stared at her with suspicion, and by the time the meal ended, some of the tension in her shoulders had begun to ease. She spent the next morning walking through town, learning its rhythms and patterns. The general store was run by a man named Thompson, who had a laugh that boomed like thunder. The saloon was surprisingly respectable, serving meals alongside whiskey and hosting card games that seemed more social than serious. The Chinese Quarter hummed with activity, laundries and restaurants and shops selling goods she did not recognize but found fascinating. Everywhere she looked, people were building lives, working together despite differences in background and origin. By afternoon, she found herself drawn back to the stable where Ethan was working with a young horse, patient and gentle as he taught it to accept a saddle. She leaned against the fence and watched, mesmerized by the quiet communication between man and animal. The horse was skittish, dancing sideways whenever Ethan approached with the saddle, but he never lost his temper, never forced the issue. Instead, he would back off, Talk softly. Wait for the horse to settle before trying again. You can come closer if you want, he called out without turning around. She is not going to bolt. Felicity climbed over the fence and walked across the corral. How did you know I was here? You have a distinctive walk, quick like you are always ready to run. He finally got the saddle on the horse's back and secured it loosely. This is Juniper. Somebody abandoned her last winter, and I have been working with her ever since. She is beautiful. The mare had a dappled gray coat and intelligent eyes that reminded Felicity of her own horse. She is getting there. Trust takes time, though. He stroked Juniper's neck and the horse leaned into his touch. You settle in okay at Mrs. Chen's? Yes, it is nice, quiet. Good. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I have been thinking about what you said yesterday, about people judging you. There is something you should know about this town. We have got people from everywhere. Chinese workers who built the railroad, prospectors from the Midwest, former soldiers from both sides of the war, women who came west to escape bad marriages or bad families. Half the people here are running from something or trying to start over. That is what makes Truckee work. We understand that the past is the past, and what matters is who you choose to be now. That is a nice idea, Felicity said carefully, but in my experience, people always care about where you come from. Some do, he admitted. There is a banker named Pritchard who thinks anyone without a pedigree is not worth his time. And there is a woman named Alina Hastings who runs the church committee and has opinions about everyone's business. But most people are too busy living their own lives to worry much about yours. She wanted to argue with him, to protect herself with cynicism and distance, but the earnestness in his voice made it difficult. Why are you being so kind to me? Maybe I like you. He said it simply, without any of the calculated charm she had learned to distrust in men. You are smart and brave, and you have not let the world make you bitter even though you have every reason to be. That is worth something. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she looked away, flustered by his directness. You do not know me. Not yet, but I would like to. He returned his attention to Juniper, giving Felicity space to process his words. If you need work, I could use help here at the stable. I take care of horses for half the town plus travelers passing through, and I am getting behind on the basic maintenance. Mucking stalls, checking hooves, grooming, it is not glamorous, but it pays. I do not know much about horses beyond basic riding. I will teach you. He made it sound easy, uncomplicated. What do you say? Felicity thought about her dwindling coin purse, about the fact that she would need money whether she stayed or left. But more than that, she thought about the way Ethan had defended her to the bounty hunter, the way he spoke about trust and second chances like they were real things that people deserved. Okay, I will try it. Over the following days, she fell into a rhythm that felt strange and wonderful in its normalcy. She woke early, ate breakfast with the other boarders, and spent her mornings at the stable learning everything Ethan could teach her. He was a patient instructor, showing her how to read a horse's body language, how to clean a hoof properly, how to spot signs of illness or injury before they became serious problems. His hands would cover hers as he demonstrated a technique, warm and steady, and she found herself acutely aware of his presence in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. In the afternoons, when the work was lighter, they would talk. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the violence that had driven him west, about the years he had spent drifting before finding his place in Truckee. She told him about her childhood, about a mother who had died when she was 8 and a father who had loved her fiercely, but could never quite stay on the right side of the law. She did not excuse Marcus Rose's crimes, but she tried to help Ethan understand that the man who had robbed banks was also the man who had taught her to read, who had sung her to sleep when she was scared, who had always made sure she had food even when he went hungry. "People are complicated," Ethan said one afternoon as they sat on the corral fence watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "That does not make what your father did right, but it does not make your love for him wrong either. Most people do not see it that way. Most people do not think about things long enough to see past their first reaction." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "You are not your father, Felicity. You are you. The sooner you believe that, the sooner you can stop running." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let go of the shame and fear that had defined her life for the past 3 years. But belief was not something that came easily after so much loss and disappointment. What if I stay and it goes bad? What if someone recognizes me and decides I am guilty by association? "Then I will stand with you," Ethan said, "and I am betting there will be others who do the same." That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Felicity allowed herself to imagine a future where she did not have to run. A future where she could wake up in the same place every morning, build friendships, maybe even build something resembling a home. It was a dangerous fantasy, fragile as glass, but she held it close anyway. The following Sunday, Ethan invited her to attend a community gathering down by the river. She hesitated, nervous about putting herself in a crowd where anyone might recognize her or her name, but his enthusiasm was infectious. "It is just people eating and talking," he assured her. "Kids running around, couples dancing if someone brings a fiddle. Nothing formal." The gathering was exactly as he described, casual and warm with the kind of easy camaraderie that spoke of genuine community. Families spread blankets on the grass, sharing food and stories, while children played tag and waded in the shallow parts of the river. Someone had indeed brought a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out as the sun lowered toward the mountains. Ethan introduced her to people, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back in a way that felt protective rather than possessive. She met Samuel Tucker, the rancher who had given Ethan his second chance, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes who shook her hand firmly. She met Maria Gonzalez, who ran the town's small school and spoke passionately about teaching children to read in both English and Spanish. She met Tom and Rebecca Foster, a young couple who had just opened a bakery and insisted she try their sourdough bread. Nobody asked invasive questions. Nobody looked at her with suspicion. And slowly, gradually, Felicity began to relax. "Want to dance?" Ethan asked as the fiddle player launched into a lively reel. "I do not really know how," she admitted. "Neither do I, not really, but that is half the fun." He took her hand and led her to where several couples were already spinning and laughing. His hand found her waist, warm and solid through the fabric of her dress, and he guided her through the steps with good humor when she stumbled. She laughed, actually laughed, and it felt like breaking through ice into sunlight. They danced until they were both breathless and slightly dizzy, and when the music slowed to something gentler, Ethan pulled her closer. She could feel his heartbeat against her palms where they rested on his chest, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this, for giving me a reason to stay. You do not have to thank me, Felicity." His voice was low, intimate despite the crowd around them. "I am not doing this out of charity or obligation. I am doing it because I care about you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. She looked up at him, seeing the truth of it in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, this feeling blooming between them. She had told herself she could not afford to care about anyone, that attachment would only make running harder when the time came. But Ethan made her want to take the risk. "I care about you too," she whispered. He smiled, that small, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and bent his head to kiss her. It was gentle at first, questioning, and she answered by rising on her toes and threading her fingers through his hair. The kiss deepened, becoming something that spoke of longing and possibility and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. The next few weeks unfolded like a dream she was afraid to wake from. She continued working at the stable, growing more confident in her skills and her place in the daily rhythms of the work. She and Ethan spent nearly every free moment together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when nobody was watching. He taught her to play cards, and she beat him thoroughly at poker. She taught him to cook the cornbread her mother had made, and he declared it the best thing he had ever tasted. They went riding in the mountains, following trails that wound through forests of pine and cedar, stopping beside alpine lakes so clear you could see straight to the bottom. He showed her his favorite spots, places where the solitude was absolute and the beauty almost painful in its intensity. She told him about her dreams, small practical things like having a house with a real kitchen and a garden, and he listened like they were the most important things in the world. But the past, as Felicity had learned, never stayed buried for long. She was at the general store one morning, purchasing thread for a tear in her skirt, when she heard someone say her father's name. The words carried clearly in the quiet store, spoken by a man she did not recognize examining a newspaper near the window. Says here they finally caught up with Marcus Rose's partner, fellow named James Cross. Been hiding out in Nevada, but somebody turned him in for the reward. Wonder if he knows what happened to all that money Rose stole. Felicity's blood turned cold. James Cross had been her father's closest friend, more like an uncle to her than anything else. He had been the calm to her father's storm, the one who had sometimes managed to talk Marcus out of his worst impulses. She had not known he was still alive, had assumed the law caught him along with everyone else in her father's gang. Shame about the daughter, another voice said. Paper says she disappeared after the hanging, probably living off her daddy's stolen money somewhere, or dead in a ditch. That is what happens to women who run with outlaws. She forced herself to complete her purchase with steady hands, to walk out of the store without running, to breathe normally even though her chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Back at the boarding house, she sat on her bed and tried to think rationally. James Cross being captured did not directly affect her, but it brought her father's crimes back into the public conversation. And if people started looking for her again, started wondering where Marcus Rose's daughter had gone, it would only be a matter of time before someone put together the pieces. Ethan found her there an hour later, her face pale and her hands shaking. What happened? She told him, the words tumbling out in a rush. I should leave, before someone makes the connection, before I bring trouble down on you and this whole town. No, his voice was firm, almost angry. You are not running again, not from this. You do not understand what it was like before, she said desperately. People blaming me, threatening me, treating me like I was a criminal myself. I cannot go through that again, Ethan. I cannot. He knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Then do not. Stay and face it with people who care about you beside you. You have done nothing wrong, Felicity. Nothing. And I will be damned if I let you throw away everything you have built here because of fear. What if it gets bad? What if people turn on me? Then we will deal with it together. He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. You are not alone anymore. Do you understand that? You have me, and you have friends here, and we are not going to let anything happen to you. She wanted to argue to protect him from the storm she was certain was coming, but the words died in her throat. Because part of her, A part that was growing stronger every day wanted to believe that staying was possible, that she could have this life, this love, this home. "Okay," she whispered. "I will stay." The storm, when it came, was not as catastrophic as she had feared. A few people in town made the connection between Felicity Rose and Marcus Rose, and there was talk, speculation that ran through Truckee like wildfire. She felt the weight of eyes on her when she walked through town, heard conversations stop when she entered a room. It was uncomfortable and painful, scraping at old wounds she had thought were beginning to heal. But Ethan had been right about one thing. She was not alone. Samuel Tucker made a point of greeting her warmly in public, making it clear that she was under his protection. Maria Gonzalez invited her to help at the school, citing her skill with reading and writing. Tom and Rebecca Foster continued to wave and smile when they saw her, treating her exactly as they always had. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow when a woman at the boarding house suggested Felicity should find lodging elsewhere and said flatly, "She pays her rent on time and causes no trouble. That is all that matters to me." And Ethan was there, steady as stone, deflecting cruel comments and standing between her and anyone who looked at her with too much hostility. He did not make a big show of it, did not start fights or make speeches. He simply existed as an immovable barrier, his presence a clear statement that Felicity was his, and anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. Slowly, the talk died down. People grew bored with speculation and moved on to other gossip. And Felicity realized that while some people would always judge her for her father's crimes, many more were willing to judge her on her own merits. Summer faded into autumn, and the mountains around Truckee transformed into a blaze of gold and red. The air grew crisp, scented with wood smoke and pine, and Felicity felt something inside her settle and take root. She was happy, truly happy, in a way she had not been since before her mother died. Ethan asked her to move out of the boarding house and into the small cabin he rented on the edge of town. It was a big step, one that would mark her publicly as his, and she knew it would cause some talk, but she did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and a view of the mountains that took her breath away every morning. They settled into domestic life with surprising ease, learning each other's habits and rhythms. She cooked meals while he did repairs around the property. He taught her to shoot, patient through her initial clumsiness, until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. She made curtains for the windows and planted bulbs in the garden that would bloom come spring. At night, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in the darkness about everything and nothing. He told her about the nightmares he sometimes had about his father, about the guilt that still haunted him despite knowing he had no choice. She told him about the moment she watched her father hang, about how part of her had died on that scaffold alongside him. They traded their pain like gifts, trusting each other to hold it gently. "Marry me," Ethan said one night in late October, the word sudden but not surprising. They had been dancing around the question for weeks, both knowing where they were heading but neither quite ready to say it aloud. Felicity turned in his arms to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They married in November on a cold, clear day with the mountains draped in fresh snow. It was a small ceremony at the church, with Samuel Tucker standing as witness and Maria Gonzalez crying happy tears in the front pew. Felicity wore a simple blue dress that Rebecca Foster had helped her make, and Ethan wore his best shirt with his hair combed back and his jaw freshly shaven. Reverend Walsh, who had been surprisingly kind throughout all the gossip about her father, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. When Ethan kissed her as his wife, Felicity felt something inside her finally, completely heal. She was no longer running, no longer defined by her father's crimes or her own fear. She was simply Felicity Norwood, wife of Ethan Norwood, living her life in a small mountain town surrounded by people who had chosen to see her for who she truly was. The wedding celebration afterward was rowdy and joyful, held in the saloon with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. People toasted their happiness, and Felicity found herself laughing until her sides ached, drunk on joy more than the whiskey being passed around. Ethan kept her close, his arm around her waist, and she felt safe in a way that still astonished her. That winter was hard, as winters in the Sierra Nevada always were. Snow piled high, and temperatures dropped until the water in the cabin's bucket froze solid overnight. But Felicity and Ethan weathered it together, keeping each other warm by the fire, telling stories and making plans for the spring. They talked about expanding the stable, maybe buying some land and starting a small ranch. They talked about children, both wanting them but agreeing to wait a year or two until they were more established. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly with a small tree decorated with paper ornaments Felicity had made and gifts exchanged by firelight. Ethan gave her a necklace with a small silver pendant shaped like a horse, and she gave him a new hat she had saved for weeks to afford. It was perfect in its simplicity, this life they were building. But in February, a stranger rode into Truckee asking questions about Felicity. She was at the stable when Ethan came to find her, his expression tight with worry. "There is a man at the saloon. Says he is a reporter writing about Marcus Rose and his crimes. He is asking if anyone knows what happened to the daughter." Her stomach dropped. "Did anyone tell him about me?" "Not yet, but it is only a matter of time." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We can handle this. Whatever he wants, whatever he writes, we will handle it." The reporter's name was William Chase, and he was persistent in the way that made Felicity's skin crawl. He approached her directly the next day as she was walking home from the general store, his notebook in hand and his smile too wide to be genuine. "Mrs. Norwood, I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your father." "No," she said flatly, trying to walk past him. He kept pace with her. "I understand this must be difficult, but the public has a right to know the truth about Marcus Rose, about his crimes, his motivations, what happened to the money he stole." "I do not know anything about that, and even if I did, I would not tell you." Her voice was sharp, years of pain and anger crystallizing into cold fury. "My father is dead. Let him rest. But you are alive, and you are a part of the story. Do you not think the families of his victims deserve to understand what kind of man he was, what made him into a killer?" Felicity stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "My father was complicated. He did terrible things, and I do not excuse that. But he was also a person, not a character in one of your sensational stories. And I am not going to help you turn our tragedy into entertainment for people who have no stake in any of it." William Chase's smile faded. "I can write this story with or without your cooperation, Mrs. Norwood. It would be better for you if you controlled the narrative." "I do not need to control anything," she said coldly. "I need you to leave me alone." But he did not leave her alone. He lingered in Truckee for days, interviewing anyone who would talk to him, digging up old stories and rumors. Some people spoke to him eagerly, happy to have an audience for their opinions about Marcus Rose and his criminal daughter. Others refused, but that did not stop the reporter from writing whatever suited his purposes. When the article was finally published in a San Francisco newspaper, someone brought a copy to Truckee. Ethan intercepted it before Felicity could see it, but she insisted on reading it anyway. The piece was sensationalized and cruel. painting her father as a monster and her as either his unwitting victim or his willing accomplice, depending on which paragraph you read. It twisted facts, exaggerated details, and turned her life into a lurid tale designed to sell papers. She sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread before her, tears streaming silently down her face. Ethan sat beside her, his hand covering hers, his presence solid and comforting even as her world threatened to crumble again. "It does not matter," he said quietly. "It does not change anything. People will read this," she whispered. "People will think I am what he says I am. People who matter already know who you are." He turned her face toward his, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are my wife. You are a good person who has worked hard to build a life here. One article in one newspaper is not going to change that." She wanted to believe him, but the old fear was back, clawing at her throat. "What if they want me to leave? What if this brings more trouble? Then we face it together. Just like we always do." The article did cause ripples. People talked, and some of the old suspicions resurfaced. But something had changed in the months since Felicity had first arrived in Truckee. She had proven herself through steady work and quiet kindness, and most people were not willing to let a sensationalized newspaper article undo that. Samuel Tucker wrote a letter to the newspaper editor, refuting William Chase's portrayal of Felicity and describing her as an upstanding member of the Truckee community. Maria Gonzalez did the same, even Mrs. Chen, who rarely involved herself in public disputes, made it clear that she stood behind Felicity. The support surprised Felicity almost as much as the original article had hurt her. She had spent so long expecting rejection that acceptance felt foreign, almost suspicious. But it was real as Ethan's arms around her at night, as real as the garden she was planning for spring. Winter finally released its grip on the mountains, and the world transformed. Snowmelt swelled the Truckee River, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows in brilliant bursts of color. Felicity threw herself into the work of spring, helping Ethan with the stable and starting her garden with seeds she had ordered from a catalog. She planted vegetables and flowers both, wanting beauty as well as practicality. In April, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery was both terrifying and wonderful. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never thought she would live long enough or be stable enough to have children. But now, with Ethan beside her and a home that felt permanent, it seemed not just possible but right. She told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I am going to have a baby." He turned to stare at her, his eyes wide with shock that quickly transformed into joy. "Are you sure?" "Yes. The signs are all there. I think it happened around Christmas." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything, Felicity. A home, a purpose, and now this. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed normally through spring and into summer. Felicity continued working at the stable until the heat and her growing belly made it impractical, then switched to lighter tasks around the cabin. Ethan became almost comically protective, fretting over her constantly and refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a water bucket. She found it endearing even when it was annoying. The community rallied around them in ways that still amazed Felicity. Rebecca Foster taught her to knit and helped her make baby clothes. Maria Gonzalez lent her books about childbirth and child rearing, sharing wisdom from her own experiences raising 3 children. Even Samuel Tucker stopped by occasionally with gifts, a handmade cradle and a rocking horse he had carved himself. In September, on a warm afternoon when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold, Felicity went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that seemed to stretch into infinity. Ethan stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths, his face pale with worry. Mrs. Chen, who had experience as a midwife, guided her through it with calm efficiency, telling her when to push and when to breathe. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the mountains in shades of pink and orange, their son was born. He was small and red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival with impressive volume. Felicity held him against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she counted his tiny fingers and toes. Ethan knelt beside the bed, his own eyes wet, one hand resting gently on the baby's head. "He is beautiful," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's face, Felicity knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "After my mother's father, Thomas Norwood." "Thomas," Ethan repeated, testing the name. He smiled. "It is perfect." The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, and more wonderful than Felicity had imagined. Thomas was a good baby, sleeping in decent stretches and nursing well, but the constant demands still left her depleted. Ethan helped as much as he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, taking on extra chores so Felicity could rest. She found herself thinking about her father during those long, quiet nights when she nursed Thomas by lamplight, wondering if Marcus Rose had held her like this when she was born, if he had felt this same overwhelming love mixed with terror at the responsibility. She would never know, could never ask him, but somehow the questions mattered less now. Her father's choices had been his own, shaped by circumstances and character she could not fully understand. And her choices were hers. She chose to build a life with Ethan, to raise their son with love and honesty, to stay in Truckee and be part of a community that had given her a second chance. She chose to let go of shame and fear, to believe that she was more than her bloodline or her past. It was not always easy, and there were still days when doubt crept in, but those days grew fewer and farther between. Thomas grew quickly, transforming from a tiny newborn into a chubby infant with a ready smile and curious eyes. He looked like Ethan, with the same dark hair and strong features, but he had Felicity's stubborn determination. By the time he was 6 months old, he was trying to crawl, refusing to stay still for even a moment. Spring came again, Felicity's second full cycle of seasons in Truckee, and she realized with quiet amazement that this was home now. Not just a place she was staying temporarily, but truly home in a way nowhere else had ever been. She knew the rhythms of the town, knew its people, knew the mountains and forests surrounding it like old friends. Ethan surprised her on their second wedding anniversary by presenting her with a deed. "It is 10 acres about a mile from here," he explained, his excitement barely contained. "Good grazing land, a creek running through it. I have been saving, and Samuel helped me negotiate the price. I thought we could build a real house there, start that ranch we talked about." Felicity looked at the deed, at their names written together as joint owners, and felt her heart swell. "It is perfect," she managed through tears. "Thank you." They broke ground on the house that summer, working on it in the evenings and on Sundays with help from friends. Samuel Tucker and his ranch hands helped with the heavy timber. Tom Foster proved surprisingly skilled at carpentry. Even Maria Gonzalez came by occasionally to help with the smaller tasks, watching Thomas while Felicity and Ethan worked side by side. The house took shape slowly but surely, rising from the earth board by board. It would be simple, nothing fancy, but it would be theirs, built with their own hands and the help of people who cared about them. Felicity designed the kitchen herself, making sure it had everything she needed. Ethan built a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset over their land. By autumn, the house was finished enough to move into, though there were still details to complete. They spent their first night there with Thomas between them, the three of them snug under quilts while the wind rattled the new windows. Felicity felt complete in a way she had not known was possible, surrounded by her family in a home they had built together. That winter was mild, and by the following spring they had acquired their first horses beyond the ones they already owned. Ethan began the work of building the ranch, training horses for sale and breeding, his reputation for skill and patience drawing customers from neighboring towns. Felicity managed the business side, keeping records and negotiating prices, discovering she had a knack for the work. Thomas took his first steps just before his first birthday, launching himself from the porch steps straight into Ethan's arms with complete faith that his father would catch him. They celebrated with a small party, their friends bringing gifts and food, and Felicity marveled at how different this life was from anything she had imagined 3 years ago when she had ridden into Truckee planning to run. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were droughts that stressed the grazing land and winters that tested their resources. Thomas was joined by a sister, Emma, born in the spring of 1881, and then another brother, James, 2 years after that. The house seemed to shrink as their family grew, but somehow they made it work, adding rooms as they could afford them. Felicity never fully escaped her father's shadow. There were still occasional strangers who recognized her name and made assumptions, still moments when the old fear would surface unexpectedly. But those moments grew fewer as the years passed, as she built a life so full and rich that the past could not compete with the present. She and Ethan grew together, their love deepening from the passionate intensity of new romance into something steadier and more profound. They learned each other completely, knew how to comfort and challenge and support each other through whatever life brought. They fought sometimes, usually over small things made large by exhaustion or stress, but they always found their way back to each other. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved horses as much as his father did, spending hours at the stable learning everything Ethan could teach him. Emma was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding before she could properly walk, giving Felicity constant heart attacks with her antics. James was gentle and bookish, preferring stories to outdoor adventures, and Felicity saw something of herself in his quiet thoughtfulness. Samuel Tucker passed away in 1884, leaving Ethan and Felicity a portion of his ranch in his will, along with a letter expressing his pride in the life they had built. Ethan wept when he read it, and Felicity held him while he grieved the man who had given him his second chance. They used the inheritance to expand their operation, honoring Samuel's memory by building something lasting. Maria Gonzalez remained a close friend, their children playing together constantly. Rebecca and Tom Foster's bakery thrived, becoming a beloved institution in Truckee. Mrs. Chen retired from running the boarding house and moved into a small cottage behind it, where she spent her days tending an impressive garden and dispensing advice to anyone who asked. In 1886, on a hot summer afternoon, a young woman rode into Truckee looking lost and frightened. Felicity saw something of herself in that haunted expression and approached carefully. The woman's name was Sarah, and she was running from a husband who had beaten her. She had no money, no family, nowhere to go. Felicity brought her home, gave her a room and a job helping with the children, and watched as Ethan welcomed her with the same easy acceptance he had once shown Felicity. Sarah stayed for 3 months before moving on to San Francisco, where she had a cousin. But in that time, Felicity saw the transformation that safety and kindness could bring. It reminded her of her own journey, of how much she had healed. "You did a good thing," Ethan said one night after Sarah had left, giving her that chance. "Someone did the same for me once," Felicity replied, leaning into his embrace. "Seems only fair to pass it along." The years continued their steady march. Thomas became a skilled horseman, working alongside his father and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day training. Emma announced at 16 that she intended to become a doctor, a declaration that surprised nobody who knew her determination. James discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the mountains and horses and people around him. Felicity and Ethan grew older together, their hair silvering and their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good living. But the love between them never dimmed, never became routine or stale. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, still found comfort and passion in familiar touches. In 1891, on their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Felicity riding up into the mountains to one of his secret places, a meadow surrounded by pine trees with a view that stretched for miles. They left the children with Maria Gonzalez, something they rarely did, and spent the day alone together. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they sat by a small fire, the stars emerging overhead. Staying here instead of keeping on running, Felicity considered the question seriously. There had been hard moments, times when her father's reputation had caused problems or when fear had threatened to overwhelm her. But weighing that against everything she had gained, the choice was obvious. "Not for a single second," she said. "This life, our family, you. It is more than I ever dreamed of having. You gave me that. We gave it to each other," he corrected gently. "You saved me as much as I saved you, Felicity. Before you, I was just going through the motions, waiting for something without knowing what. You made me want to build something real." She kissed him then, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude and joy into it. They made love under the stars like they were young again, urgent and tender all at once, and afterwards lay tangled together in their bedrolls talking until dawn. The 20th century arrived with optimism and change. Truckee continued to grow, electricity and telephone lines making their way to the mountain town. The railroad brought more tourists, people coming to see the natural beauty and escape the cities. The world was transforming, but some things remained constant. Thomas married in 1899, a sweet woman named Claire who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the land adjacent to Felicity and Ethan's property, close enough for daily visits but far enough for privacy. Their first child, a daughter they named Felicity, was born in 1900, and Felicity found herself a grandmother at 43. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, looking at that tiny perfect face, Felicity was overwhelmed by the realization of how far she had come. From a terrified young woman running from her father's shadow to this, 3 generations of family built on love and hard work and second chances. The little girl would grow up knowing nothing but stability and affection, would never have to run or hide or be ashamed of her name. "She is beautiful," Ethan said softly, looking over her shoulder at the baby. His hair was mostly silver now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes held the same warmth and strength that had drawn Felicity to him all those years ago. Just like her grandmother. "We did good," Felicity said, her voice thick with emotion, "with all of it, with our life." "Yes," he agreed simply. "We did. Emma left for medical school in San Francisco in 1901, determined and fearless. James sold his first painting that same year to a gallery in Sacramento, launching an art career that would eventually take him all over the West. But both of them always came home to Truckee, drawn back by the ties of family and place. Felicity and Ethan settled into the rhythm of growing old together. They slowed down some, letting Thomas and Claire handle more of the ranch work, but they never fully retired. Ethan still trained the difficult horses, still had the magic touch with even the most skittish animals. Felicity still managed the books, still negotiated sales with the keen mind that had always been one of her greatest assets. They traveled some, taking the train to San Francisco to visit Emma and to Sacramento to see James's exhibitions. But they always returned to their home in the mountains, to the house they had built and the land they had nurtured. Truckee was in their bones now, as much a part of them as they were of it. In 1905, on a warm May afternoon, Ethan suggested they ride up to that meadow again, the place where they had spent their 10th anniversary. Felicity agreed eagerly, and they saddled their horses and made the familiar journey up into the mountains. The meadow was exactly as she remembered, unchanged by the years. They spread a blanket and lay in the sun, holding hands and talking lazily about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about a young horse he was training who reminded him of Juniper, that skittish mare he had been working with when they first met. Felicity told him about a letter she had received from Sarah, the woman they had helped so many years ago, who was now married and running a successful boarding house in San Francisco. "I have been thinking," Ethan said as the afternoon wore on, "about how lucky I am. How easily my life could have gone differently if you had not walked into that stable 27 years ago." "I am the lucky one," Felicity countered. "You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he said, echoing what he had told her all those years ago. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person saving the other, but both people choosing to build something together." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. On the ride back down to the ranch, Felicity felt a profound sense of peace. Her father's sins no longer defined her. The running and fear and shame that had once consumed her life were distant memories, important only in how they had shaped her path to this moment. She was Felicity Norwood, wife and mother and grandmother, a respected member of the Truckee community, a woman who had built a good life from the ashes of tragedy. And she was happy, deeply and completely happy, in a way that 20-year-old girl fleeing Sacramento could never have imagined. More grandchildren followed as the years passed. Thomas and Claire had 3 more children. Emma married a fellow doctor and they had 2 daughters. James found love with a teacher named Anna and they settled in Truckee and had a son. The ranch house was often full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms and playing in the yard that Felicity had planted so many years ago. Felicity and Ethan watched their family grow, their legacy spreading out in ways that had nothing to do with bank robberies or violence, and everything to do with love and perseverance. They had taken the second chance that Truckee offered and transformed it into something remarkable. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, the entire family gathered for a celebration. 3 generations filled the house and yard, sharing food and stories and affection. There were toasts and speeches, and Felicity found herself crying happy tears as her children and grandchildren talked about the foundation of love and acceptance that she and Ethan had built. That night, alone in their room after everyone had left or gone to bed, Ethan pulled her close. "30 years," he murmured. "Best years of my life." "Mine too," she said, kissing him softly. Every single day with you has been a gift." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded. Afterwards, lying in the darkness, Felicity thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The pain and the fear, the courage it took to stay instead of run, the daily choice to build something lasting. Her father's shadow had grown smaller over the years, fading in the bright light of the life she had created. She understood now that Marcus Rose's crimes were his own, that they did not define her or determine her worth. She had learned to hold both truths at once, that she could love the father who had raised her, while condemning the criminal who had hurt so many others. The years continued their gentle passage. Ethan's health began to fail in 1912, his heart growing weaker despite the doctor's best efforts. Emma came home to help care for him, her medical knowledge a comfort even when there was little she could do. He faced it with the same quiet strength he had brought to everything else in his life, more concerned about Felicity and their children than about himself. On a crisp autumn morning, with the aspens blazing gold outside the window and Felicity holding his hand, Ethan Norwood passed peacefully in his sleep. He was 64 years old, and he left behind a legacy of love and kindness that would continue for generations. Felicity grieved deeply, the loss cutting through her like a blade. But even in her pain, she was grateful. Grateful for the 33 years they had shared, for the family they had created, for the love that had transformed both their lives. She had known happiness because of Ethan, had learned that she deserved to be loved without judgment, had built a home and a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. She lived 11 more years after Ethan's death, watching her grandchildren grow into adults and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She never remarried, feeling that what she and Ethan had shared was complete and perfect and could not be replicated. But she was not lonely, surrounded always by family and friends, her days full of purpose and connection. She told her story sometimes, to grandchildren who asked about the past, wanting them to understand where they came from and what it took to build the life they now enjoyed. She told them about Marcus Rose, not shying away from his crimes but also sharing memories of the father who had loved her. She told them about running and being afraid, about arriving in Truckee with nothing but hope and desperation. And she told them about Ethan, about the cowboy who had seen past her father's reputation to the woman she truly was, who had given her the second chance that changed everything. She told them that love was a choice, made new every day, and that family was built not just on blood but on loyalty and acceptance and forgiveness. Felicity Norwood died in the spring of 1923 at the age of 66, in the house she and Ethan had built together so many years ago. She was surrounded by 3 generations of family, their faces the last thing she saw before she closed her eyes. Her final thoughts were of Ethan, of that first day in the stable when he had looked at her and seen possibility instead of shame. She was buried beside him on their land, overlooking the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and the years of their lives, but the legacy they left was vast and rich, written in the lives of their descendants and in the memories of a community that had given them both a place to belong. The ranch continued under Thomas's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. The house remained in the family, a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, a reminder of where they had come from and what their ancestors had built from nothing but determination and love. And in Truckee, California, now and then someone would tell the story of Felicity Rose who arrived running from her father's crimes, and Ethan Norwood who taught her that she could be judged on her own merits. How they built a life together that proved second chances were real, that love could heal old wounds, And that home was not a place you found, but something you created with courage and hope, and the willingness to stay even when staying was hard. It was a love story, pure and simple, set against the backdrop of the Wild West in all its harsh beauty and possibility. A story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose every day to build something lasting. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered.